Then in 10th, 11th and 12th, I worked really hard with the hope to crack the coveted IIT exam. But alas, Uncle हाँ मैं वहाँ के झाड़ू पोछा करती थी. Should you do an MBA right out of college? GMAT happened. The first attempt was 690. Horrible. I got a rejection from Chicago booth. They did not even consider my application. $250 क्यों waste कर रही है महक? ये साल ही है. करनी है application तो अभी करो. नहीं तो वो नहीं होने वाली. My entire dream of an MBA abroad is going to shatter. इससे नहीं होगा. I'm not good enough. Then came Stanford's offer letter as well. Steve Jobs, in his famous convocation speech at Stanford, once said, "Dots connect looking backwards." And I agree with him. But raise your hand if you felt so horribly stuck at a dot that you do not have the physical, emotional, or mental strength to move to the next one. Raise your hand if you felt that the world around you has told you what your limitations for the next dot are simply on the basis of the journey you've covered. What Steve Jobs did not account for in his theory of dots was that there are millions of people in this entire world who are not able to move from one dot to the other simply because they fall through the chasm. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mehek. I'm not only here to share my story of how I was the first female student and the second student ever in the history of NSIT, a premier Indian institute with 50 years of legacy, to make it to Stanford Graduate School of Business. But I'm also here to do it how I did it without a lot of support from external consultants. How I did it even when the world told me I don't deserve to be there. Growing up, I was this underconfident, extremely competitive, nerdy kid, I was that kid who would stay back after the classes to discuss what the answers of the questions would be in an exam. I'd try to predict what my marks are going to be. I'd try to think that am I going to be in the top 5, and I would constantly live in that fear, working really hard and then barely making it in the top 5. Then in 10th, 11th and 12th, I worked really hard with the hope to crack the coveted IIT exam. But alas, I was barely in the top 10,000. Thankfully, NSIT happened, they accepted me. Followed was that every single company that I was visiting, unfortunately, had a written test. And all my friends who were then preparing for CAT, GMAT, etc., were able to pass those exams, but I wasn't able to. Despite being the top 10 percentile academically in NSIT, I was not able to get through any written exam of these placement companies. Imagine this, that even the people in the bottom 40 percentile, they were getting job interviews and jobs, and I was stuck at not clearing any written interview, which meant I did not even go through a single interview, let alone a job offer. I was at my rock bottom. So much so that some of my friends around me would mock at me and say, "How did you even make it to Texas Instrument? Koi setting ki thi kya?" My mom saw that I was struggling. She's been the guiding light of my entire life. She encouraged me to try meditation, try building a winner's mindset. Call it my meditation, call it my manifestation. Nomura came to the campus after 2 years of not being on campus. And guess what? They did not have a written exam. And I knew this is my opportunity, and I grabbed it with both hands. That year, they took 2 people from the campus for full-time offer at Nomura, Mumbai. I was one of them. My brother had just returned from US, and my dad was expanding his business. He was now wanting to venture into some new areas that were unexplored, so somewhat like entrepreneurship within the business. He encouraged me to come and join the family business. In hindsight, I think it was just his strategy to get his little girl back to the same city as he was. Nonetheless, I agreed to join. I joined my family business, which is into manufacturing. Now, this was a 360-degree change in my work environment. Suddenly, I was the only female in a workforce of more than 120 people. Even the plant manager, when he would talk to me, he would just not look at me. He would almost look at ways to just run away from me, as if I was some alien. But more than just the work environment, it was also this change in what I was doing. In Nomura, I was being constantly told exactly what needs to be delivered, maybe in the form of presentations, in terms of any analysis. But here in my dad's company, I was the one who was expected to lead departments. I was the one who was supposed to give answers to people, to guide them as to what they should do with their day. I suddenly felt extremely incapable of making those decisions. I kept looking at my back and wondering, is this the best way of doing this particular thing? To top it all on, even not just the blue collar workers, even my dad's clients, when he would say that Mehak has joined the family business, they would say, oh yes, we need someone to keep the place prim and proper. Uncle, हाँ मैं वहाँ के झाड़ू पोछा करती थी. All of this made me think that let's take a step back. And I thought, I genuinely need to upskill myself. My engineering has given me a set of skills, but that is not helping me lead teams. That is not helping me with strategy. That is not helping me decide how do I take the company further. That's where the idea to do an MBA came to my mind. So my why was very clear, that why I want to do an MBA. The next three questions, I'm sure all of you who are in that journey of doing an MBA or wanting to do an MBA would be thinking these similar questions. The first one is, which country do I do an MBA from? The second one is, within that country, which colleges do I go to for my MBA? And the third one is, how do you put your applications to reflect your best self? How do you ace your essays? How do you get your recommendations, your GMAT strategy, etc., etc.? So the first decision was college, the location, sorry. In terms of having done my engineering in India, I felt, what different would doing an MBA in India be? I'd heard of the similar placement rat race in MBA colleges in India also. And I knew my why. I constantly kept going back to, why am I even doing an MBA? Is it for another stamp on my resume? Is it for another degree? Is it for another tag? No. I genuinely felt that I needed to upskill myself. And I felt, which is why I do not want to do an MBA in India. And also in hindsight, I feel I was so horribly scared of going through the entire placement rat race again, that I felt I do not want to do it here. Now I started exploring different countries. My default was doing an MBA in US. Why? Because the country felt familiar. My brother had been there for 6 years. I'd visited him multiple times, was already impressed by how hands-on the entire education in his undergrad was. So the choice was made. I thought US is where I would want to do my MBA. Now within US, I started looking at colleges, and I cannot stress enough how important is it to choose the right college for yourself. It's almost like you're marrying someone or you're dating someone. While you can be dating multiple people, you really need to know why this specific person, what is it between the two of you that works really well. I tried to figure out, what about my application are my spikes. There were two big spikes. One was my entrepreneurship journey within my dad's business. The other one was my finance role at Nomura. Keeping those as the two building blocks of my entire application, I thought, what are the colleges that resonate with these two stories? And what are the colleges that will genuinely, sincerely help me in my entrepreneurial journey? So because my why was so clear that it's not for those brands, etc., my backup was that if I don't get into the colleges that I really want to get into, I will just rather not do an MBA. Now, an MBA in US is almost, depending on where you do it from, is between a 1 crore to 2 crore total, expense. Which is why I was constantly very mindful that I want to do it only if I'm very sure that I will get the kind of ROI that I'm looking for myself for that journey. From there, I saw the colleges. I would spend almost half a day every single day when I was putting these applications together on just going through the website of the top colleges that I thought were in my list. Now, the option at that stage and the questions that I was asking myself, and I'm sure you all are asking yourself, are, should we apply to too many colleges? One advice that stuck with me since then to today, and I give this on to whosoever asks me about how do you ace your applications, is that imagine if you remove the word Harvard and put the word Stanford, your entire essay should break down. That's how personalized your application should be, the school that you're applying to. That's how much you have to tell the school that I love you, I love you, I love you. If you remove the name Mehak and replace it with someone else, even then the entire application should break down, which means that's how personalized your application should be to who you are as an individual. It cannot be a generic application. Knowing the amount of effort that each of these mapping is going to take me, I thought I do not want to spread myself thin. I want to focus on quality and rather than quantity. Now, like a lot of you, I thought that I will actually work with consultants, and I did speak to a couple of leading consultants. Looking at my profile, looking at my less than 2.5 years of work experience at the time I was starting to apply, all of them said, these colleges that you're targeting are way beyond your league. You should apply to some safe schools. What did I do? I just fired all of those consultants because I felt I do not need that negativity around me. I know I'm fighting against all odds, but I also felt this is why I want to do an MBA, only to do it from these prestigious institute where I would really upskill myself. The good thing is, because my brother had come back from US, he became my sounding board. He was the one who I could take my applications to. He would tear apart my first versions and be like, there's so much cultural nuance that you have to understand. And that's why I think I could have done it still without a consultant. For a lot of people, I would not. A lot of people do succeed with consultants also. So no way am I advising that what I did was right. I think I got lucky. But at the same time, is the consultant right for you or wrong for you? The consultant has to have 100% unwavering confidence in you and your application. So be very careful about who you choose to surround yourself with as you put your applications together. The other question that was in my mind at that time was that should I apply in round one? In round one, I felt I was already behind my entire deadlines. I wanted more time. Or should I apply in round two or round three? I felt that procrastination is easy. I'll always find the time is less. I would want to tweak my applications a little bit more and do it in R2. But I felt in a college, say Stanford has 420 seats, if 100 of those are taken away or 120, 130 of those are taken away in round one, you will have those many lesser seats in round two. And because the entire application process is a bit of a black box, I would not necessarily know that what was the acceptance versus the application ratio for each round. And I wanted to maximize my chances, which is why I decided that let's focus on these 4 colleges in round one. And then if I don't make it in any of them, I will move to the next set of colleges in round two. Now, because I was sure that I wanted to do an MBA in US, I was sure that Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, and Chicago Booth are the 4 business schools that I'm applying to. I knew that GMAT is inevitable. Now for GMAT, I took some test papers. They have these sample mock papers that all of you can access just to know what's your baseline. Maybe some of you are already ready to ace the GMAT on day one. I knew that I wasn't ready. I also knew that despite having a great spoken English, the grammatical expectations of a GMAT may not necessarily agree with me. And which is why I enrolled myself with Jamboree. I did a 3-4 month course there to ensure that my verbal section is taken care of. I did multiple mocks, that they had provided me with. Now, one thing I want to mention is, after 3 years, and this is a question that a lot of students around me had at that time, is that should you do an MBA right out of college or should you do it after 2-3 years of gaining experience similar to what I did? In my opinion, having some experience before you choose to do an MBA will help you decide why do you want to do an MBA, where do you want to do an MBA from, what are the skills that you want to build while you are doing your MBA. Because if I don't know what are my flaws, where am I struggling professionally, how will I make the best use of that MBA program? The downside of doing an MBA after 2-3 years of college was that test taking is an art. If you have to sit down for 3-4 hours to do that GMAT exam, just to be able to sit still for those 3-4 hours and focus consistently might be difficult for a lot of you. So that's a trade-off and you have to decide what's right for you. My personal advice is, if you are 2-3 years experienced, you might make slightly more out of your entire MBA program. So GMAT happened. The first attempt was 690, horrible. I knew none of my target colleges will take me at 690. I gave a second attempt. It was still okay, 730. Now I knew that the average GMAT score of Stanford is 730, but the Indian average of GMAT at Stanford would be around 760, 770. So if you have to take out the Indian average, you simply add 30 points to 40 points in the average of the campus, because Indians are naturally better at test taking. However, I did not have more time and the patience to give a third attempt. So I thought 730 it is. It is just the right score. It gets me my foot in the door. And that's where I started putting together my applications. As I was putting these applications together, I constantly kept a small diary with me to keep collecting my thoughts, to keep answering for myself that why do I want to do an MBA? Why do I want to do it from this specific college? Because the advice of, how do you personalize the entire application to the college that you're applying to, it kept going on in my head. And how do I put my story together? There are different threads of my story. Which thread do I pull? And that's why I kept adding those points so that I know these are the 100 points that make me who I am today. And now, how I craft that story, I had, I think, 50 odd versions of the story to get to my final stories. I started applied to all four of them, and then the wait starts. I got a rejection from Harvard. I got a rejection from Chicago both. They did not even consider my application good enough to be interviewed. Thankfully, both from Columbia Business School and from Stanford, I got an interview invite. I knew that I'm just so close to the entire process that I cannot screw it up here. I was smart enough this time because I didn't have a consultant to constantly email or LinkedIn approach a lot of people who had already been alumni of these great colleges. I only needed one of them to reply so that I can sort of get a sense on what do I do to prepare myself best for the interviews. Thankfully, 2-3 people were kind enough to tell me how do I approach these interviews. I prepared myself really, really well for these. Now, imagine this, that my Stanford interviewer, on the day I connected with him, when I was matched with the interviewer, he told me that I'm actually traveling out of the country for another 10 days. So if we can do the interview today itself, like literally the day I emailed him that, I'm allotted to you for my interview, he asked me to get interviewed the same day, or else the entire process would have to take 10 more days. I was sure the entire waiting will drive me crazy, and I thought it's best that I get done with it on the same day. So I went there. The entire interview experience was incredible. Both the interviewers, both at Columbia Business School and Stanford, were extremely curious about my journey. They kept asking me the 5 whys that, why did you do what you do? What would you do differently? How would you change the course of your actions in the past if you were to see the outcomes the way they did come out? All of that happened, and I did my interviews to the best of my knowledge. Further wait, and then the offer letter from Columbia came out first. I was extremely elated because I did not expect to make it. And then came Stanford's offer letter as well. I could not believe, because everyone around me, even the friends who came to know that I'm applying to these colleges, they said, $250 क्यों waste कर रही है महक? And I was so thankful that I took that bet on myself. Had I never applied, thinking that no one from NSIT, no female, and I'm only the second student from NSIT to get to Stanford, had I thought कि मेरे से पहले एक ही तो जना गया, and his profile was significantly better, I did not let all of that decide my decision to apply for these colleges and do my best. Now, some consultants also advise me कि आप 1-2 साल और रुक जाइए. Your application might get stronger. You just joined your family business, so the story of how much you would have contributed in your family business would not come out well in your application. But being from a Marwadi family, with the marriage sword hanging on my head very closely, and I knew if my parents see me not doing too much, they would be happily ready to marry me off. I was like, ये साल ही है, करनी है application तो अभी करो, नहीं तो वो नहीं होने वाली. My entire dream of an MBA abroad is going to shatter. Now, in the application also, when I was thinking of what are the different angles, and I kept jotting those points down, that what are some important points because of which I am who I am, I kept noting those down. And the final thread that I took in Stanford's essay, especially because I saw that sustainability is at the heart of Stanford, being entrepreneurial is at the heart of Stanford. The obvious story that finally came out for me was my story of how the entire sustainable fashion is the movement that I want to enhance when I come back to India, when I join my family business, and how we can make the sustainable fashion, the cruelty against animals, the entire fast fashion, how do I move against it? So those are the angles that I touched on in my story. I also shared my own story with a lot of transparency. क्योंकि कोई कंसल्टेंट नहीं था मुझे बताने के लिए कि क्या करना है कि नहीं करना है. I just decided जो है, with as much honesty I can write it down, I wrote it down. And probably that authenticity, that genuinity gave the admissions office a refreshing look at what I bring to the table as I join any of these business schools. So if your thought at the level is, oh, मुझसे नहीं होगा, I'm not good enough, मेरे से आगे तो इतने लोग हैं, if those are the constant thought, which was what I was before I was introduced to meditation, then it's hard for you because you are being your biggest enemy, right? So how do you change all those negative thoughts and replace them with positive, constructive thoughts is what I've learned through my meditation practice, and that helped me keep going further in my life. I think it's because of that I did not have any imposter syndrome while at Stanford as well. I had opportunities to work with the co-founder of Twitch, someone who was on his 4th unicorn when I met him. I actually had the chance to fly on a private plane. All these experiences shaped me to understand that my thought is what is restricting how high I can reach in life. But now I want to make sure that I'm sharing all parts and aspects of my MBA and not just the ones that are all glamorous. Once I realized when I got into second year is that visa situations for international students are always going to be a little tough. There'll be types of jobs which will simply be inaccessible to you because the people would always want to not sponsor your visa, especially if it is small teams, early stage startups, or venture capitals, private equities. Those roles, more often than not, would be a little more difficult for an international than for an American citizen, which is okay. The second thing I realize is that I do not want to raise my kids or myself from people who I love the most, far away from people who I love the most. I didn't want to show my kids to my parents on a laptop. I want to be there with my parents, with my family, with my husband as I build my life. I felt nothing is worth being away from my family. But the third and the biggest reason that got me back to India was that I was genuinely very bullish on where the Indian economy is headed. And I feel I made the right decision. Now, I'm not here to tell you कि यार जैसे parents बोलते थे right कि 10th कर लो life set है, 12th कर लो life set है, Stanford चल जाओ life set है, life set नहीं है. You have to make sure आप अपनी life हर stage पे set कर रहे हो. The ups and downs, the dots will keep going down even after Stanford. Stanford के बाद मुझे 100 crore की funding मिली. I could not build my startup despite that. I returned 70 crores back to the investors क्योंकि मुझसे मेरी startup नहीं बनी. That dot fell back down. But that does not mean that I'll get stuck at that down dot. What I feel so horribly scared of today, more than anything in life, is what if I stop moving and that dot is the bottom rock and not the top dot of my life. And that's what I want to inspire all of you to do today. Irrespective of which college do you end up being, irrespective of what tags do you wear, you decide what you do next. What you've done in the past will, of course, influence your future journey, but it should not so horribly influence it that you stop trying, that you stop believing in yourself. Today, in my role of being the director of a new age business school called Masters Union, I'm trying for a lot of us to be able to get the same level of education that I received in my MBA at Stanford. To learn business by doing business is the mantra that we follow at the business school. The last thought I want to leave all of you with is that dots will keep going up and down. The decision that I took to take that plunge on myself, on my human potential, I deserve to be at Stanford even when the world is telling me no. I deserve to get the best of education even when the consultants were not able to accept me. That decision today has led to a lot of other decisions. But it was that unlocking my human potential, unlocking the belief that I can do it, and unlocking this is my next high that I want to achieve is what led me to be where I am today. And I'm sure you will not cut yourself short either. You will unlock your human potential. You will decide what your next high is going to look like. Good luck.